Hi, this is Terry Fender, your District 8 Director. We're back today for another virtual D8 workshop. Today we're going to take a trip down to Georgia and talk with Judge Jamie Green, and he's going to be discussing the basic care of successful rabbit raising. Jamie, take it away.
Hi there. Well, thanks for inviting me in. Hopefully I might be able to provide something that might be of use and benefit to everybody. I've been around in the rabbit circles for quite a long time, started when I was a youth, back when I was 10 years old, and some 40 some years later, I'm still in it. So it's really things that I've picked up over the years, and the main thing I want to put upon you today is that it's really no tricks or little things that'll get you by being a successful rabbit raiser. I think it's primarily sticking to basics from what I've experienced and I've seen over the years. So that's what I really want to stick to today, was primarily those items and present them to you. You go to the next slide. That one is showing blank there. Okay.
Just 1 second, I got a computer glitch here.
Sure, no problem. Just to give you a little background on, while we're waiting, I'll give a little background on myself. As I mentioned, I started in rabbits when I was at the age of 10, and I've been in them for 40 some years now. I've been a judge for over 35 years, and it's taken me to a lot of different places. I've had the opportunity to meet thousands of people and different breeders over the course of those years, and have had a lot of experience in seeing different sides of the whole rabbit spectrum in terms of breeders, people that have been meat breeders, fanciers, and so, I mean, I've seen a lot of different, and also in lab use also, I've seen those places as well. So I've had a pretty broad spectrum that I've seen of things. So, all right, it's pretty well much what I had just mentioned to you, and what I have seen. I just want to get these basics over to let you know what it is, what I have seen has been successful, and hopefully that's going to be able to have some takeaways for you where you can get the most out of what you do and to optimize your time spent while raising rabbits. You can go to the next. Okay, I've summarized the topics I wanted to touch on today. Pretty much basics: housing, air, water, feeding, and sanitation. I'll go through each one of these with a slide and kind of stress upon the items that I have seen that other successful rabbit breeders have used and have put into place during my time in rabbits. And hopefully these are items that'll make sense. And like I said, there's not gimmicks, I think, that make people successful rabbits. It's sticking to the basics and being consistent with those basics. So we can start with the next. Housing, your caging. And this is what I have seen. Depending on what breed you have, it's really important that you have the proper cage or hutch available to that rabbit in terms of the proper flooring, the size, because that rabbit, your rabbit is going to spend its entire life primarily in that cage. And if it's a cage that the rabbit is comfortable in, has enough room for exercise, they're going to get the most muscling in their toneness in their body. And that's going to be helpful in trying to get the best that you can get out of the rabbit. The one thing I do recommend for any of the giant breeds, solid floor cages. The first rabbits that I raised were giants, Flemish giants, and it's pretty well much. I have seen some use of wire where it has worked, but for the most part, I think the most part, most of the breeders with the giant breeds do use solid floor cages with bedding and substantial bedding where it's soft, kind of have a floor that's not slippery. One of the things that I did was for my floors when I built my cages, I would take a small layer of, I would put down my paint, and while it was still wet on the floor, I would sprinkle over sand, just regular sand from a sandbox. And that would stick on that and it would help make the floor less slippery. And that seemed to be helpful. The other breed that I have raised and had a good amount of time raising was Belgian hares. And with hares, I do believe that the solid floors are best for them. They have a fine bone structure and they just tend to do a little bit better than on wire floor. Wire floor cages are great for the majority of breeds. And I think it's really important for those rabbits that are on wire floor that they, our attention is paid to, and I'll touch on it when we get into sanitation, but those floors kept clean. And anyone that has raised any white rabbits will tell you cleaning is really important with any type of cage, with any white colored rabbit, because of their tendency to stain. So it's just really the basics that you're looking at with housing. The one thing I do mention, I think if we go to the next slide, is whether it's stacking cages or a hanging cage, it's really important that they're stable, that there isn't a lot of give and move with the cage. Like a hanging cage should be affixed so that it doesn't move. The rabbit feels more secure when it's in a cage like that instead of one that's just left to sway throughout open. They're just not going to be as comfortable. They're not going to move around as well. They might even feel scared, is my theory on it. And for the sizing of the cage, that's really important also. You want to, depending on your breed, you want a cage big enough so that that rabbit can move comfortably in that and get the correct amount of exercise that they need. For example, on Flemish Giants, I felt like, and the standard was that most of the breeders I knew, that for a single rabbit, a cage 4 feet by 4 feet was a substantial size cage. Also with the cage, the size depends on what the rabbit is. If it's a single rabbit living in the cage, is one size, but if you got a doe and litter, you're going to need a larger cage to accommodate that doe with the litter because there's more animals in there and they need more room to move around. And also it avoids the rabbits from getting too hot in a cage, which can be a concern depending on your location and the time of year. Summer, it's going to be a lot warmer, so they need more space to be able to move out and spread out so they can stay cooler throughout. So that would be the recommendations that I have and things to watch out with your housing. The other thing I just thought of, another item that you might want to be aware of is where you're locating your cages. If there can be in a place where it's relatively quiet and not a lot of interruptions, that generally is a little bit better, I have found sometimes. Instead of having a lot of movement around them, they feel a little more relaxed and tend to typically do a little bit better, I have found. So we can go to the next topic. Water. This one is a really big one for me that I have seen, is because it's something that I feel has been overlooked by a lot of people. And I have found the very, very successful breeders are ones that made sure that they had a supply of the freshest water possible to their rabbits. Uh, I have seen a lot of people that have used crocks or bottles, and typically they might just go in and they add water of on top of what hasn't been drank from the day before. And after a while, if that's done for that, that water gets stale and it really doesn't have fresh water, and the rabbit might have a tendency not to drink as much. So the thing I'd stress upon here, whenever you're watering, if you're using bottles or crocks, throw that water out from the day before and go back in and give them a fresh supply of new water for that day, for the day that you're watering them. And with water systems, the thing I would say there with that, they're great because it keeps the water sealed and contained where there isn't a lot of outside contaminants that get in. I'm not saying that they can't get in, but it helps to keep a lot of outside. But periodically, I recommend with water systems that they be taken apart and be cleansed with cleaning them. So what that would entail would be taking your water system apart and cleaning it. Sometimes a common one that I would use would be like a Clorox or chlorine bleach into water and flush the parts out and then rinse them out and let them dry in the sun. So that's a big one for me. I have seen a big difference in the quality and the health of rabbits based on the water supply that animals are given. So we can go to the next slide. Feeding. Okay, this one here, I'm not going to try to even begin to recommend or discredit any brands because I feel that's better left for you to decide in your area and to have others in your area that might be able to help you make that decision. The thing I would emphasize here is that your feeding practice is consistent. Rabbits are nocturnal by nature, and they will generally eat during the evening. So I found it always best to feed in, the evening time and to stay consistent with that. You don't want to, rabbits that really do better and clean up their feed is an important part. Each day when you go out there to feed, you want to see the feed that you've given the rabbit from the day before is almost entirely gone. You don't want to see a lot of leftover feed from the day before. So you don't want to overfeed, and that's really, really important. I was taught that for a person who I worked for that had a large commercial style rabbitry that had one of the top herds in the country. He wanted to make sure that the rabbits were always looking for feed the next day, not to overstarve them or anything, because if you really think about it, that animal that's conditioning should be in the top health, and it's almost like the rabbit has become an athlete. They want to muscle. They want to get the most premium flesh condition that you can. So between the feeding and the water, staying as consistent as possible with them, that is really, really important. The thing I would say here, this is not rocket science. It's pretty much the basics, but you want to get the basics right and do your best job with them as possible. You can move on. Okay, as I mentioned, the best part I thought would be feeding the rabbits in the evening. There's more tendency to come right to their feeder and ready to eat at that time. As I mentioned also, it's just being as consistent as possible with the time that you feed each day. And as I mentioned, you want to make sure that the animals are cleaning their feed up. And when you see a rabbit that hasn't cleaned its feed from the day before, maybe cut back a little bit from the normal ration. to make sure that that rabbit has gotten back on and is on its program of finishing their feed each day. So we can move on from that. I think I covered that in the prior one. Okay, the aspect of sanitation is really very important as well. I have found the cleaner the environment that you can keep your rabbits in, the better they will do. And this is probably the biggest part onto anyone raising rabbits. This is your hard work part, keeping your cages clean, going the extra mile, wire brushing them, scrubbing them, washing, vacuuming dead fur on a consistent schedule pays off in the long run. It makes the difference between first place and not first place a lot of times. As I mentioned, it's a lot of work, really tiring, but there is some good parts of it. I know when I was very busy with a rabbitry and putting a lot of time and energy into it, you're like, what am I getting with this? But there's a real satisfaction when you get done at the end of your time spent cleaning, whatever you're doing. You can kind of just kick back a little bit and think, wow, I did all of that. And I'm on top of this. I did the best of what I could. It's up to the rabbits now with the right breeding, the right conditioning for them to do what they can do. But this is the part that you can do the most here, is with the conditioning. And you're keeping your rabbits clean. And you can go to the next slide. And this takes me back to a story I remember when I got my very first show rabbits. The person who I got them from had an immaculately clean rabbitry. It was some rabbits that I had found. They were like 3 hours from where I lived, and it was a little trip to go get them. And when I got there, it was like being wowed. It was like the rabbits were clean. The entire place was fantastic. And I was like, wow, I want to keep mine like that. So that got me into that bug very early from there. And I remember I went to a rabbit show shortly after getting those rabbits, and there was another breeder there who started talking with my parents. My parents told that person where and who I had gotten my rabbits from, and he made a comment that the rabbitry was so clean that you could eat off the floor in it, and it was nothing but farther from the truth. And that one kind of always ringed home with me. So just something to kind of keep in mind. So we can go to the next part. And this is our time for questions. I'll let somebody go back there and come up with some. Oh, did we miss one in the batch here? I think air. Oh, yes, we did. Okay. Air is probably one of the most underrated or overlooked items in successful rabbit raising, is the amount of fresh air and ventilation that your rabbits need the best to do in. A fresh air supply to them and ventilation is a world of difference for being successful with raising rabbits. They do much better when the air is fresh. And it's not only something that can affect their respiratory tract and be a health concern for them, it makes a big difference. It's one of the givens. I'm not speaking about having wild winds blowing through your rabbits or something. I'm just saying having a little gentle wind and movement of air is really important. And it's just really important to have fresh air and not have air that's stagnant. And stagnant air allows odors to build up, which also can have an adverse effect on the respiratory tract. And with having good air, that also helps as part of your sanitation practices that you have. Okay, I think we've covered all of the parts that we had. I'll I'll ask Terry, did you have any questions? Terry, you wanted to ask?
Well, I might say a few words to give
Sure.
our Facebook viewers a little time to chime in. Oh, before I do though, for those watching out there, please feel free to chime in where you're at, your town, your state, your province. We're always happy to see and hear where our viewers are at right now. But please also chime in with any questions, and Amanda there at the control center will read them off to Jamie. In the meantime, I guess I didn't really have a question, but I really like how you talked about keeping the cages clean, because I always have people ask me, well, how do you clean up stains? Well, you can tell them, but it's always better to keep those cages clean so you don't get stains in the first place.
I agree.
So I like the way you stress that. And of course, the ventilation. I mean, I've been in some barns that, oh my gosh, your eyes watered, and people wonder why the rabbits aren't doing too well.
Yep.
Okay, Amanda, do we have anybody coming in with questions?
Not at this time, we do not. But we do have people that chimed in and said that they were watching from Michigan, Kentucky, Indiana, Australia, New Jersey, Delaware, and then one person says Canada, but I know they're from Ontario. Mm-hmm. See here. We have Missouri that was watching. And I have another Indiana that just said hello. Oh, and we have Manitoba.
All righty.
Yeah.
We've just about got all corners of D8 covered. That's awesome.
We do have, yeah, we do have all of D8
provinces.
I'd like to say hi to our friends up in Manitoba, everywhere. Good to see y'all there tonight. Any questions there for Mr. Green?
I don't.
Alrighty. Sometimes we get a bunch of them. Other times, if your presentation covers everything, there's not a lot of them there. But Jamie, I appreciate this. You really covered, because to me, people can spend all that big money on rabbits, but if you don't have that sound, you know, I guess it's a healthcare aspect behind there, the clean cages and nutrition. Doesn't really matter how much you spend on rabbits, does it?
Yeah, you can get the most out of them with just the basics if you're really serious about this. It's having a good handle on, like I say, basics. I mean, that's what the best of them have been. I mean, all of the people with the top rabbitries in the nation that I have been to, and I've been to all 50 states, it all drives back to having the core principles down and doing your best that you can with those.
Definitely. I definitely agree. Amanda, you see anything coming in there?
I do not.
Okay, well, let me read off a couple of things here and see if anybody has any questions in the meantime. I'd like to invite everybody to our next virtual workshop, and that'll be just about 5 days away on June the 16th, and we'll be starting at 7 p.m. And that, of course, is Eastern Daylight Time, like we've always been, June 16th at 7. We're going to do another, we did, to me, a couple of the really basic things we need. We talked today about the proper care, and next one we're going to be talking about proper posing and handling. We did this one as our original workshop last summer, and I think posing and handling is something you just can't stress enough of. So we're going to be joined on the 16th by Judge Brian E. Smith out of Kansas. So we're taking a virtual trip to Kansas. And Brian is going to be talking on posing and handling. And for those of you who might want to check out all of our videos, feel free to visit the D8 YouTube channel. And that is ARBA D8 website. That's 3 different words, ARBA, the D8 website. In a few days, we'll have tonight's video on there, along with our other virtual workshops. Plus, we've got most or a good portion of our live workshops from last fall, including the original posing and handling done by Glenn Carr last summer in Wapakoneta, Ohio. So, with saying that, Amanda, are there any questions or comments coming in?
No, there is not.
Okay. Well, Jamie, I want to thank you again for joining us. I appreciate all that insights because again, this is something people really need to think of before they spend all that big money, get the basics down.
Yep, I agree. And I would just want to say thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We're very grateful and we appreciate your time. And I also want to say thank you to Amanda at the Control Center. She's running the board for us up there, plus doing our training sessions before and working on all the slides. And also thank you to Jane Burt, not only our webmaster and our e-newsletter editor, but she's the one that puts out a bunch of these flyers helping us promote these events. And of course, thank everybody out there watching these. You guys are the reason we're doing this. Until we can get back to our live events, we're doing these virtual workshops and hopefully keep everybody interested and maybe we can learn a little bit in the meantime. So unless Amanda has any other comments coming in, we're going to go ahead and say goodbye. Amanda, anything else?
No, I do not.
All righty. Well, friends, thanks for joining us. June the 16th, 7 p.m. We hope to see you back then. Stay safe and bye-bye.